On the day that school resumed, Manka'a reluctantly drove her daughter to the school. It was called the St. Martha's Boarding School for Girls, and the whole ride there, something told her to turn around and go back home. But she kept driving forward. Once upon a time, in a town called Bamenda, there lived a woman named Manka'a. Manka'a was kind and loved by everyone. She was the wife of a pastor, a well-respected man in town, and people often commented how well he treated her. He showered her with love and affection and attended to her every need. From the outside, it seemed like Manka'a had it all. A loving husband, a nice house, cars, fancy clothes, and jewelry. But she was not as happy as she pretended to be in public. All her life, she wanted a baby. And since getting married, she and her husband had tried everything to get pregnant, but nothing was working. Despite her constant prayers, God still had not given her a child. Manka'a was constantly on her knees, crying and asking God why. One day, thankfully, God answered her prayers. Manka'a became pregnant and her joy knew no bounds. Her husband was over the moon, showering her with even more love and affection than before. Manka'a loved being pregnant and she felt so blessed. As her belly grew, so did the love between her and her husband. They spent evenings talking to their baby, dreaming about the future, and getting the baby's room ready. The whole town shared their joy, offering congratulations and support. Manka'a felt like she was carrying a gift in her womb. When it came time, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy daughter called Suru. And from the moment Suru was born, Manka'a and her husband showered the baby with love and care. Manka'a made sure that Suru had everything she needed to be happy. Their home was filled with laughter and joy as Suru grew. Manka'a loved being a mother just as much as she loved being pregnant. She loved watching her daughter's eyes light up with curiosity and delight. She spent hours with Suru, reading her stories and singing lullabies. Her husband too adored their little girl, often cradling her in his arms and whispering sweet words to her. They celebrated every milestone, from Suru's first smile to her first steps to her first words. Manka'a grew very attached to her daughter as she got older. They spent every moment together, and when her daughter went to school in the mornings, Manka'a would hang around the school compound waiting for closing time so that she could see her daughter again. She felt a constant ache in her heart whenever they were apart, always worried about her daughter's well-being. Manka'a took Suru everywhere she went. Their bond was so strong that Manka'a's husband often joked that it was as if one would die without the other. Manka'a's love for Suru was so powerful that she could not bear the thought of anything happening to her precious daughter. She certainly did not trust anyone in this world with her daughter. Which is why when Suru turned 12 years old and it was time for her to go away to a boarding school in the neighboring town, Manka'a really struggled. The school, run by Reverend sisters, was the best in the region. And while Manka'a hated the thought of being apart from her daughter for months at a time, she also knew that a good education was crucial for her daughter's future, and she wanted only the best for Suru. Manka'a and her husband talked about it for months, and Manka'a cried when she finally made the difficult decision to enroll Suru at the school. On the day that school resumed, Manka'a reluctantly drove her daughter to the school. It was called the St. Martha's Boarding School for Girls, and the whole ride there, something told her to turn around and go back home. But she kept driving forward. The campus was alive with activity when they arrived. Parents and children were everywhere, talking excitedly as they unloaded suitcases from their car and into the school. Senior students lined up by the school entrance, welcoming everyone and helping the newcomers find their way around campus. The school compound was very beautiful and the girls were neatly dressed and very polite, which gave Manka'a a good feeling. When everyone was settled in and it was time for the parents to leave, Manka'a hugged her daughter tightly. She stood by the school gate, tears running down her face as she watched Suru follow the senior girls into the campus. She watched Suru disappear around a bend, happily chatting with her new friends. Manka'a fought the urge to run after her daughter, grab her and take her back home where she belonged. But Manka'a also knew that she had to let go. She got back in her car, crying as she drove home, and counted the days until she could return to take her daughter back home. The school term was 3 months long, and she wished time would fly. She spent those 3 months having constant nightmares and calling the Reverend Sisters weekly to check on her daughter, who seemed to be doing just fine. 3 months later, on closing day, Manka'a was the first parent to arrive at the school. She was so excited to see Suru that she could barely stand still. She carried a large lunch box full of her daughter's favorite foods, which she had stayed up all night making. As the school gates opened and the students started coming out, Manka'a eagerly searched for Suru's face in the crowd. The atmosphere grew lively as the students spotted their parents and ran to them. Manka'a waited and waited for Suru to show up, standing on her tiptoes as she scanned the crowd. She began to worry when moments later, Suru still had not shown up, and the crowd of students coming out of the gate had reduced. Her heart started beating fast, and her excitement was turning to fear. Where was Suru? What was taking her so long? Manka'a stepped inside the gates and started asking around. She asked anyone she could find. The gate man said he had not seen Suru leave campus. She asked Suru's classmates if they had seen her, and they all said yes, that they had seen her only minutes ago. That calmed Manka'a's heart a little, which was threatening to beat out of her chest. She approached the school principal and the teachers next, who all confirmed that they too had seen Suru not that long ago. But where was she? Manka'a asked. Her panic was growing and growing, making it hard for her to breathe. Even though they all claimed that they had seen her only moments ago, something did not feel right to Manka'a. She ran around the campus searching for her daughter. She looked everywhere, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. The school authorities soon joined in, searching every inch of the school, yet no one could find Suru. Manka'a's worst nightmare had come true. Where was her daughter? She carried her hands on her head and paced. She could not breathe. People were talking to her, but she could not hear anyone. This could not be happening to her. She closed her eyes and prayed that the nightmare would be gone by the time she opened them. But when she opened her eyes, Suru was still missing. It was getting dark at this point, and the school principal suggested that they should all go home and continue the search the next day. That was when Suru lost her mind. She started screaming at the principal. How could the principal suggest such a thing? What if her daughter needed her? This was all the principal's fault. Her daughter was missing because of their negligence. They were going to pay. She will make them all pay if they did not find her daughter soon. She spent that night at the school, and all night Manka'a circled the school compound, calling out to her daughter, hoping she would hear her. She checked under the benches and looked behind the buildings, hoping that her daughter was hiding there, playing hide and seek. But by morning, she still had not found Suru. Her husband, who had been on a business trip, arrived at the school the next morning. He was just as heartbroken. Manka'a tried to speak, to explain what had happened to her husband, but her voice failed her. She tried to cry, but her tears had all dried up from crying the whole night. Without knowing where her daughter was, she felt empty inside. She felt like a deflated balloon. Another minute spent without her daughter. She just wanted to lie down and die. She followed her husband home reluctantly. The police were all over the campus now looking for Suru, and there was nothing Manka'a and her husband could do other than go home and wait. Manka'a prayed that it was all just a nightmare. But it was no nightmare. One day turned into 2, then a week, and still no sign of Suru. Manka'a and her husband called in every favor they had and used every service at their disposal, but Suru was still nowhere to be found. She had simply vanished. There was no trace, no clue, nothing, and it made no sense. How did a 12-year-old girl disappear without anyone seeing her? Everyone was puzzled. After a month of searching, the pain became unbearable for Manka'a. Not knowing where her daughter was or if she was okay was the worst punishment to a mother. 1 month turned into 2, then a year, and she lost all hope. With each day that passed, she lost the will to live. Her husband did everything to keep her spirits up, but she no longer felt connected to the world like she did when she had her daughter. She stopped eating and taking care of herself, and eventually she fell ill. One day she simply died from heartbreak, unable to live in a world without her daughter. Her family and the people of the town mourned her deeply, hoping that her soul would go to heaven. And to ensure it, they buried her in her favorite shoes, a pair of pointy red high heels her daughter had picked out for her as a birthday gift. But Manka'a's soul did not go to heaven like her family and the people of the town had hoped. She did not go to hell either. Instead, her ghost roamed the hallways of her daughter's old school endlessly with one goal in mind: find Suru, find my daughter. Every night, her ghost would wander out of the darkness and circle the school campus like she did that first day her daughter went missing, lifting objects and dropping them, checking under benches and peeking behind buildings. At midnight on the dot, feeling frustrated about not being able to find her daughter, she would walk into the girls' dormitories, stopping by each girl's bed to check if the girl sleeping there was Suru. She lingered in Suru's old dormitory, spending longer by the bed her daughter once slept in, touching the girl's face who now slept there, whispering her name, and then sighing with disappointment when the girl did not answer. And then she would walk out, only to return the next day. The students of St. Martha's, of course, did not know this story I just told you. They had no idea who Manka'a was or what her backstory was. All they knew was that there was a ghost haunting their school, and they called it Crush Crush because of the sound the ghost's shoes made when it walked into their dormitory. They never saw the ghost's face or figure. They only saw blood-red high heels walking up and down the dormitory without feet in them. The girls were terrified of the ghost, and it had even become the norm that everyone was to be asleep before midnight just to avoid hearing the ghost. Complaints had been made to the teachers and parents, some students begging to be sent to another school, but no one believed them. The grown-ups all thought that they were imagining things. One girl in particular, called Lu. Take note of this girl I just mentioned, because she is the one who will help us figure out what happened to Suru, the missing girl. Lum was occupying the bed that used to belong to Suru, and because of this, she felt more haunted by the ghost than anyone else at the school. While the ghost would only briefly visit the other girls' beds, it lingered by Lum's bed for minutes, sometimes up to an hour, touching her and whispering to her. This made Lum very uncomfortable, and it kept her from sleeping at night. She wanted it to stop. She desperately wanted the ghost to stop touching her and whispering to her. So one day, Lum gathered two of her friends and they all decided to talk to the ghost. The plan was to ask the ghost what it wanted and find a way to appease it, hoping it would stop haunting their school and making their lives miserable. One night, Lum and her two friends waited up until midnight when everyone else was asleep. They were scared out of their minds because none of them had any experience dealing with ghosts, but they were desperate enough to try. The ghost's nightly visits were driving them crazy. Actually, Lum knew exactly what she was doing. She had a unique background that none of her friends knew about. Her father was a Catholic priest and an exorcist, but no one knew this because priests were not supposed to have children. Surprisingly, Lum had a good relationship with her father. They met up in secret regularly, and he had taught her many things, including how to contact spirits. When Crush walked into the dormitory that night, Lum emerged cautiously from the shadows and said, "Hello," loud enough for the ghost to hear her, or at least she hoped it would hear her. She had learned many things from her father, but had never actually tried any. This was her first time contacting a spirit. Truth be told, she was not really interested in the spirit world. The only reason she learned was because her dad loved that kind of stuff, and she wanted to spend more time with him. She never really took any of it seriously until now. Lum was surprised when the ghost's heels stopped moving at the sound of her voice. She saw the red blood high heels stop and turn, then started walking hesitantly toward her. Her heart pounded as they approached. Maybe she should not have done this. What if the ghost killed her and her friends? Thinking of her friends, she turned around and found out that her friends had all abandoned her at the sight of Crush and were now hiding under a bed nearby. Manka'a's ghost was shocked when it heard the little girl say hello to her. She had not spoken or been spoken to since she died. It was like her ears had stopped working after her death, and yet she could hear this little girl clearly. The girl seemed to be roughly her daughter's age. All Manka'a remembered about being dead was walking around endlessly, feeling lost and hurt the more time that passed without finding her daughter. Her brain was so foggy that nothing but the desperation to find her daughter could break through. That is until this little girl spoke to her. Manka'a walked curiously toward the girl, stopping a few steps away to observe her. It was not until she was close that she realized that it was the girl who now slept in her daughter's bed. She heard the girl introduce herself and ask what Manka'a was looking for. The girl was so polite and she offered to help Manka'a find what she was looking for. Manka'a was taken aback by the girl's kindness, and because of this, her memory started coming back. Manka'a suddenly remembered her daughter in full color, something she had not been able to do since she died. And the memories brought tears to her eyes. Unable to stop herself, she started to tell the little girl about Suru, starting from the day she was born. Lum listened to the ghost, and as the ghost spoke, something amazing happened. Her figure became visible, like something materializing out of smoke. Lum found herself no longer speaking to a pair of blood-red high heels, but to a full woman. The sight was both heartbreaking and frightening. The woman looked so frail and lost. Her makeup was smudged on her face and her eyes were sunken, and her lean figure made the pretty dress she wore seem too big for her. Lum immediately felt sorry for the woman. The woman spoke longingly of her daughter, and the story she told was so heartbreaking that Lum forgot she was talking to a ghost and started to feel more comfortable with her. Lum could tell that the woman was in deep pain and that she just wanted to find her child, nothing more. The woman even apologized to Lum for disturbing her and her classmates. She had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "I will help you find her," Lum said after the woman was done talking. "I promise you I will find Suru." "You will?" Manka'a wiped her tears, unsure if she should believe Lum. But Lum seemed like an honest person. "I promise, but I need you to stop coming to our dormitory, please, at least for now. It makes it so hard for us to sleep." Manka'a was hesitant at first. The thought of not constantly looking for her daughter scared her. What if she missed a chance to find Suru by not looking? What if today was the day that she was supposed to find her daughter? But the earnest look on Lum's face convinced her. Manka'a nodded and agreed to stay away from the dormitory for now. The two of them made a deal. Lum had 2 weeks to look for Suru, and Manka'a would stay away from the dormitory. They shook hands on it, and as Manka'a walked out of the dormitory, Lum stood there wondering what she had just gotten herself into. What had possessed her to promise such a thing? She had no idea if Suru was dead or alive, or how to find her. And she had just 2 weeks to do it. What had she done? Thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe and comment. And stay tuned for part 2 as Lum and her friends embark on a mission to find out what really happened to Suru. The moral lesson of this story is that we should always listen to our instincts. If your heart tells you not to do something or go somewhere, don't do it. If only Manka'a had listened to her heart that day, she might still have her daughter today and be alive herself. The story also teaches us that there are 2 sides to every story. Even if someone seems like a bad person on the outside, always get to know people first before judging them. You might be surprised. Look at how Lum decided to talk to the most feared ghost of her time, only to realize that the ghost was just a woman in pain looking for her daughter